Hello, everyone. My name is Kino Marks, and I'm your host for today's webinar. We're going to talk about how to break things down, especially big things, big goals, big projects, big systems, and big teams as well. So I'm not going to do this all by myself. I have help from two wonderful speakers. One is Tasha Cherian. So Tasha, why don't you join us and introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Tasha. I come from a fintech background, focused more on the service delivery operations perspective. So led large initiatives, and that's really my view here. You get these large goals, and then it gets thrown onto your plate. So that's my view.
Fantastic. And we're going to add Wayne as well. And Wayne Hetherington, welcome to our webinar. So why don't you introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name's Wayne, and happy to be here today. I have a little bit of a background in enterprise agile coaching and working with larger clients and organizations in their big problems, and how do we deal with that?
Yeah, fantastic. So this is a great set of speakers for the topic that we're just about to talk about. So how do you break things down? We're going to talk a little bit about, well, what is it really that we want to break down? What are those things? What are those big buckets of work, goals, teams, name it? Then understanding as well of why is that even important? Why would we want to break those things down? What are the challenges that we're facing if we don't? And we're going to get into a couple of specific tips and tricks depending on the type and provide you with some reference as well of where you can learn more. And of course, throughout this webinar, there is time for you to ask questions as well. You can do this in the chat, in the comments that you should be seeing on somewhere on the right-hand side. And if you can, in the meantime, tell us where you come from as well, where you're calling in from and where you join us, then by all means, let us know who you are so that we know who we're talking to as well. Okay, so let's get started here. So the first thing that we wanted to talk about is really what is it that we want to break down? And we discussed a little bit before we started this webinar that we kind of want to start from the objective, the goal, the big goals. Oftentimes in large organizations, you're setting yourself some really audacious objectives, and they tend to be fairly big. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. So Tasha, what are the kind of challenges with those really big audacious goals?
Yeah, I think if the group doesn't understand like the larger vision of what we're trying to accomplish, they lose. If anything, fear probably sets in, like, no, but we've been operating at a certain level, like we don't understand why we're doing this goal. So I think bringing people along for the journey is a big piece of it, and understanding the why behind that goal, so that they can understand, oh, okay, that makes sense. Hey, we've been working or operating in this type of level, but as the organization is changing, or we're looking to make a different strategic initiative, what the value is in terms of that new goal. So I think it's more about transparency and like the communication pieces and highlighting the why.
What you're actually talking about is, well, those big goals, even though they might be a little bit uncomfortable because they are so big and they're not always easy to work with, they are important because you kind of want to set that vision. You want to know what you're working towards. You want to make sure that you stay transparent and bring everyone into the fold, right?
Yeah,
so Wayne,
exactly.
what are other kind of challenges that you might see related to this?
Riffing off of Tasha here, I always like the quote from Yogi Berra. He says, if you don't know where you're going, you might not get there. So you have to have some kind of a goal. It could be a short-term, short range goal, but if that's all you do, you'll never have those big goals. But the big goals seem overwhelming sometimes, right? So you got your short, smart goals. You've got your stretch goals that move you just a little bit more, but then you have the big, hairy, audacious goals. And I think if we just plopped down the huge goal, everybody would feel like overwhelmed. How do we even get there? So there's a technique that I've seen used before where you kind of work backwards. You start from the big goal where Yogi Berra wants to go, and then you kind of work back and you break it down. You break down the goals so they become more manageable and more doable, and you can actually measure success against the steps that you're taking based on those goals.
Yeah. So what you're essentially saying is you are just thinking about this big audacious goal, and you're thinking about, okay, hang on, in my own head, what are the steps that I would need to take to get there? What are the different steps if you're talking about climbing a mountain? What are the different steps that I need to take in order to climb that mountain one step at a time? And then start setting that and communicating that as your intermediate goal. Was that what you were referring to Wayne?
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly what I've seen work really well in a lot of situations, and that still allows you to think big, but then you start small and you make some of those small steps with the big vision still in mind.
Okay, amazing. So Tasha, do
Yeah,
you have?
sorry, just want to reiterate that quote.
Yeah,
Start
go
small,
ahead.
think big, right?
Fantastic.
That's a
Yeah.
big one.
Yeah, Tasha, do you have any examples of something like a big goal, something concrete that you've had in the past and that you had to break down into smaller steps? If you're thinking about an example like that, what would it be?
Yeah, so within an organization that I was working in, we had a large initiative to onboard a brand new service provider. And at the time, we already had all these crazy colliding projects, and the timelines were absolutely absurd. But but I think the great thing what the leadership team did was they really helped us understand why we were making these decisions to make this shift, because it would completely change our operating model. It would change the way our business was operating. And so just bringing the right people into the room, understanding the why, understanding what that impact would mean against the other projects or programs that were already in place at that time, and just taking a moment to really hear, we've talked about psychological safety, but making sure that people who are close enough to the work understand what needs to be done to get that initiative completed. So bringing the right people to the table was a good piece for us, and just making sure that leadership was involved in those conversations, because leadership had made some decisions and hadn't taken some things into consideration. And so I think the top down, bottom up approach in terms of strategic initiatives, I think it's also important. So sure, the leader can have a vision of where they want to go to, but making sure that those that are actually close enough to the work have an opportunity to voice that as well. That was big. We were able to meet it, which was great. But it was a painful start because everybody was against it. It was why we don't need it right now. Things are running. Why break something if it's not? Why fix something if it's not broken?
Yeah.
So yeah.
And on top, I mean, it's always the case, of course, right in the beginning, in order to get that structure, to get that alignment, to make sure that everyone is bought in, though it might be a little bit painful, you need to bring everyone together and get that kind of common understanding and that common path forward. But at the same time, it really sets you up for success going forward, right? And that's really, really important. Now, you mentioned, Tasha, specifically related to this work and to this example that you gave us. You mentioned that there's multiple people involved that have multiple roles in this initiative and in achieving that goal. My assumption is that there were multiple systems that needed to change as well in order to make that happen. Is that fair?
Correct. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. What were some of those systems or some of those areas within the client that needed to change?
Yeah. So when we were bringing on that new supplier, you're talking about legal and compliance, you're talking about operations, you're talking about the technology delivery teams, vendor management. So it was all different areas that weren't involved. But at the time, the individual that's making the decisions and leadership team is only thinking about just onboard that supplier, and that it'll sort itself out, and it's just a matter of a connection piece, but it's not. There's different pieces that have to come in, and then you also have to look at what's the impact to our customers. So how does that impact our service to our customers?
Yeah, and for some of those changes, for some of the achieving some of those big audacious goals, especially in larger organizations, which is typically where you find those, there's a whole ecosystem of different applications working together and different changes that need to be made to those different applications. And of course, that in itself is leading to, call it a big project or a big program in order to achieve those goals, or a set of thereof. Wayne, do you what are you? I saw you smiling or smirking. What are the kinds of feelings that come up when you get those big programs, or when you are introduced to them?
It's probably fear.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, big things. Well, I wanted to mention too. Well, two things I wanted to mention. Usually, those big goals, those big projects, big huge things that we do carry a lot of risk with them too, and that's what I think
Hmm.
freaks everybody out. Is this big thing may not go the way we want it to. In fact, it probably will be different than what we're thinking of right now. So, how is it going to change? And there's a fair bit of risk in there. If you've got a lot of money on the line too, that could be a big factor that kind of holds people back. We're scared of that naturally, and we should be, because it's important. So there's that whole risk idea, but it sounds like you're shifting gears a little bit into the product area. I
I,
wanted to
I,
mention OKRs if you wanted to get into that.
yeah, by all means.
So talking about the goals again, we got the big hairy audacious goals. When you read John Doerr's book about OKRs and setting the objectives, he really encourages companies to be visionary and think big and set those big goals. But he also goes in and he talks in his book about how you break that down. And so he describes a goal cascade in the book, and I've seen that work really well. That's a good technique where you set the big goal for the organization, and then you allow the departments, divisions, the people, the teams underneath that to set their goals and align to the higher goal. And when it's done really, really good, he describes a goal cascade that goes both from the top down and from the bottom up. And when you do that, you get the bi-directional cascade. You really create alignment, which is super important for success of doing a big project.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're bringing up that word alignment. I often, when people ask me what OKRs are, I often just simplify it by saying, well, it's really an alignment tool. It's not a tool to enable you to set targets or anything, but it's a tool that enables you to align between the objectives and the outcomes and the priorities, if you will, of the larger organization. Now, aligning those objectives and priorities with the objectives on the individual departments, the teams, and so forth. And that is kind of the cascade that you were referring to. Like the OKRs of teams enable or help achieve the OKRs of the department, help achieve the OKRs of the larger organization, and so forth. But there is another cascade possible as well, of course, right? And we kind of were talking about it a little bit earlier. When those big goals are split up into smaller ones, you might, for instance, say, you know what, this year, this is our priority, 1, 2, and 3. These are the things that we want to achieve. But we're not going to start working on these things for an entire year. We want to see at the end of this particular quarter whether or not we made a step forward, and whether or not we think this is still achievable, right? So maybe there is some competitors that do something else that might inform us to revise our OKRs, and then we should be able to do so. Maybe we are exploring a certain direction or a certain path that seems not feasible by the time that we get some more background. So on a quarterly, you can actually have quarterly OKRs that support your annual OKRs. And if you really want to take this a step further, you might also say, as an organization, where do we want to be in 3 years from now? And in order to get there, what do we need to do this year? In order to get there, what do we need to do this quarter? So that cascade really works in two different dimensions. One is how to create alignment throughout the entire organization, but two, also how to create alignment between your priorities that you have now and your longer term, midterm, for 1 year, and longer term priorities that you might have going forward. So go ahead.
As you bring up OKRs, some things I've seen in the past, organizations, they spend all this time to get your OKRs from an HR perspective. Everything has to log in. It has to align to their strategic goals. And then at the end of the year, people are going in there making sure that they've put in those pieces. I think that alignment is what's so key. It's important that you go in quarterly and review, like, hey, did we actually achieve what we had set out for? And if not, how do we revise it? Like, use those tools as not ways to dictate, did I hit my bonus or not? Use those as, are we aligned to the strategic goals of the of the organization?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
So let's start talking about how to achieve those big goals, right? So we broken them down. We broken them down per team. We broken them down per department. We broken them down in quarters as well. And if you really want to, you can go as far as you want, of course, right? And say like, hey, what do we want to achieve this month? But there are some things that need to now go and implement those goals and try to actually change the organization and move the organization forward so we can achieve them. And we typically do this with those larger programs that made Wayne cringe when he talked about them. So how would we break down those larger programs, Wayne? And what are the challenges, first of all, with those larger programs, apart from everyone kind of getting scared and trying to run away from them?
Well, if you tackle, you're talking about problems of large programs. So if you tackle just a large program in one big chunk, there's all kinds of things. We talked a little bit about the fear that's induced by that, but also the risk involved in doing a large piece of work. There's other things that happen too. It's really, really hard to measure progress on a huge, big thing, right? You can't tell if you're actually, getting closer to done on this piece of really big work, but you can on smaller pieces of work. Some of the other things that become problematic, we can't measure. We also can't get a sense of accomplishment. If you can't feel that you're done until the end of it, and it's going to take 2 years, then you're struggling. All your people are struggling working against this thing for 2 full years. You don't feel like you've accomplished anything. But smaller chunks make that much easier, and maybe allow you to get some benefit out of whatever it is you're building sooner than you would have before if you waited until the big piece of work was finished.
Yeah, so you call out a couple of different things, right? So one is you want to get feedback, or progress. That's what you really called it, because it's sometimes even impossible to identify what progress is at a big program perspective. What does done even mean from that perspective? But the other piece that you called out as well is return on investment. Maybe we already get some return from this initiative, and then also kind of see progress towards our objectives, right? Because that's kind of what those key results are intended to do. So, Tasha, do you have any concrete examples or any other things that you might want to add to how to break programs down?
Yeah, I think Wayne already did touch on some of it. I think when you're on these large initiatives that take 3 years to go and implement, that path is so far away. If you don't celebrate along the way, take those small wins, at the end of the day, from like a psychology perspective, like you don't feel like you're achieving anything. Even as simple as I'm going to compare it to like weight loss. If you have these big goals that you want to do, but if you're not measuring what that looks like along the way, you're going to get defeated. So I think those were some of the pieces, and making sure that people see that, okay, yes, we have that long vision of what that looks like, and bringing them along for the journey. Okay, yeah, we learned a lesson here, and that feedback loop is also key. So learning lessons along the way, and
Okay.
yeah, making sure just that fear of failing, make fast mistakes and learn from them.
Okay, that's amazing. So really all comes down again to breaking these things down into smaller steps to ensure that we get that feedback, to ensure that we learn faster, to ensure that we can put something into production, if you will, or get some benefit from it if it's not necessarily a software project or program or service that you're building, because of course all of this is transposable to all kinds of audacious goals and big programs that you want to deliver. Now, those programs don't deliver themselves either, right? It's not because we are able to split it up and able to identify what it really is that we want to do, that we've able to identify what those incremental steps are that help us get there. Oftentimes, there's a whole bunch of teams involved or individuals involved, at least, to deliver on those projects. Taisha, you mentioned earlier the need for alignment between, for instance, departments like legal and audit and finance and others, right? But also within the a department, the delivery department itself. These are kinds of external, not external stakeholders, but definitely crucial stakeholders. Don't get me wrong, but they're not necessarily people or stakeholders that directly have put their hands on keyboards or help deliver something. They're there to ensure that everything is oftentimes delivered according to certain policies, and that the organization is not exposed to unnecessary risk and so forth. So I always look at kind of 4 types of stakeholders. There's the people who are basically asking for the work to be done. There's people who make the work be done. There's people who are involved because they're impacted by the work that is being done. And then there are people who can block the work from moving forward. And so the finances and the audits and the securities might actually be part of that latter group. Equally important, and it's important to bring them down, to bring them up really early in the process. So let's look a little bit about those teams and how we can go about organizing a larger team to deliver on those particular objectives. And in the meantime, I'm reading here what one of our participants has shared with us. So this process of breaking down also gives us an opportunity to test our hypothesis and understand whether our investments will really yield the result that we are expecting. Exactly. This is what both Tasha and Wayne were also referring to. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Saru. So go ahead, Wayne, or Tasha. Who wants to take this one on? How do we organize ourselves in order to deliver such a big program?
Well, I just before we hop into teams, sorry, Tasha, I was reminded of the quote. We're thinking about doing a big thing, and we're gonna put all these people on it because we need the hands to do the work, and let's do it agile. So because it's supposed to be good, right? Agile will help us to do this well. And so we're looking at scaling up agile. So there's an idea out there that says don't scale agile, descale your product. And I think that's kind of key. So it's backing up even before we get to the teams and the people and how we're going to set up the teams and the process they're going to use. We should be taking a look at the product itself. Are there ways we can descale the product, split that up into smaller pieces? And this could be at all kinds of different levels. I'm thinking when Google reorganized into Alphabet, for instance, they restructured, they descaled the products they offered based on value streams. So they've got the regular Google that they always were. Then they split off Nest into its whole entire different department. They got Google X for working on new breakthroughs. And then they had two sort of venture capital areas. There's the Google Ventures for new ideas, and Google Capital for long-term ideas. So even the idea of where they're going to invest their money was split into these two value streams. So we can do the same thing with a bigger piece of work. Maybe we can break it down based on the value that we want to deliver or that goal that we want to achieve. And if we can slice that into pieces that are independent, then we can start building them much more efficiently with the teams that we have. A big monolithic piece of work is incredibly difficult for people to work on.
Yeah, so you're referring now to the architectures as well as supporting those products and supporting the things that actually enable the service in the end for our clients, right? And with those architectures, of course, because some people might be familiar with the Conway's Law, where the systems that certain teams are delivering are actually a reflection of the communication channels and the patterns that those teams expose themselves. So what you're actually referring to, Wayne, in having split up these architectures into from a monolith into things that have its own responsibility, that is limited, that is very clear as well, is actually enabled by teams that are split up themselves as well. But then still in an organization or an ecosystem as complex as Google, you can imagine that a certain feature requires changes by multiple teams in multiple parts of that architecture. So how do you coordinate the communication between those teams? How do you coordinate that work so that we're not all going off into our own direction and in the end up with 15 different pieces that are difficult to tie together?
Yeah, so you remind me of in the book Team Topologies, we're looking at how to organize teams, and same idea is there. Descale your product before you scale up the teams, or you put the teams together. And one of the suggestions that I really liked in his book is what they call fracture planes. So you look at your business and you pick a plane in which to fracture it into smaller pieces, and you can break things down that way. Um, yeah, well, there's 2 or 3 different techniques he describes in the book, but usually it's on the main one is business domain. So you break your product down based on business domain. This is where the idea of value streams come in, where if you want to decide where to break the product, select the source of the value, where that value is coming from, and then stream that all the way back. So that's one way to split it. However, in the book, he makes the point that the people are the ones that build the product. The people are the most important part. And so we want, as we're deciding how to fracture our product up, we want to consider the people and who's going to be building this, and basically reduce dependencies between people. That's going to be your biggest win right there.
Yeah. Tasha, have you seen any examples of how that communication is happening between multiple teams that are impacted? Any specific techniques that you can refer to?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go down the typical path of like these massive, large kickoff meetings. You get 40, 50 people in a meeting and everyone's just silent. So I think what ends up happening is, sure, you give awareness to everybody that this is happening, but then you got to break it up into the smaller groups and making sure there's that regular communication. So you'd have champions in the different, smaller squads, and then making sure that you have, the squad leaders are meeting on a regular cadence so that everyone has awareness. At the end of the day, you want to be able to scale the change as well. So if everybody has to come and give in their updates, you can't do stand-ups with 50 people and doing roundtables. Like it just doesn't, it's not going to work, right? So we need to make sure that communicating what the larger vision is, and if you do have champions within those different squads or those areas, that they're representing that whole group, and then you bring in that communication piece. But I think it's really about identifying like champions and saying how that communication stream is going to work. And it doesn't mean that if something is going wrong that you have to go to only the champion who then talks to the the project manager who talks to the program. No, we don't. That's not how it works either, right? Like you need to make sure that the communication pathways are clear, but it's just making sure that there's constant communication. So if people do have a set cadence of what that communication is going to look like, they know, okay, like, I know that the group meets on Tuesdays, make sure I can raise that to the group accordingly, depending on how much of a, if it's an escalation that needs to be raised or not.
Yeah, so I remember that based on what you said, I remember a couple of different things that you mentioned. So one is making sure that your meetings are not too big, because otherwise you automatically get a one-directional, unidirectional approach where you're kind of pushing a message down. And some of those things need to be pushed down. It's important as well. Like, for instance, hey, we want to make sure that everyone understands what the vision is. Bring everyone together so everyone hears those same questions as well. But other things, like how do we follow up on progress? What are the changes that we're tackling right now? What are the challenges that we're facing throughout the process? That, of course, does not necessarily require all 40, 50, sometimes 150 people on that same call. For that, you can rely on champions. Champions, however, that do represent, and this is something that you said as well, it's very important, that do represent everyone else, and that do represent a certain function, a certain discipline, if you will. And on top of that, the third thing, and it's really important, is that cadence. You have a natural cadence, you have a cadence that everyone can rely on. And then now we could say, like, okay, hang on, we have this touch point on a weekly basis that we can bring things up at this level. We have this touch point on a monthly basis that we can bring things up at this level. Some of those things are embedded in for instance, larger Scrum implementations where many people have heard of a Scrum of Scrum. There is Scrum of Scrum is definitely a technique that can be used to bring multiple people together. Let me take time to read Laszlo's message here. So if this was mentioned before, just ignore. No worries, Laszlo. But before we put anything into motion, we should validate if our product or service idea is valid. Absolutely. I see many
yes,
companies forgetting this. This can be they can be surprised after a while to figure it out. I haven't read the whole thing yet, so whoever is removing the message, I'm hoping that I'm not filling in the gaps wrongly. Get surprised after wasting money at all, and that product managers can save a lot of time and effort to put on the right direction, or to make sure that we go in the right direction. So that can result into descaling. And we indeed mentioned this, Lazo. We started from the goals originally, and a larger goal is not necessarily immediately implementable or achievable. So we break those up into smaller ones. Those smaller ones have their own key results, and they allow you as well to get feedback and seeing if indeed you are working in the right direction. That idea that you had is indeed attracting clients, or is indeed achieving the benefits that you had intended in the first place. So thank you so much, Laszlo, for this insight. It's definitely something that is valuable for all of our listeners as well. So I think we are ready to start taking more questions. So if you have any questions, by all means, put them in the comments on the side. And our panelists here, Tasha and Wayne, and myself as well, will be happy to answer them as best as we can. In the meantime, Wayne, let me ask you if there would be one thing that you would like the audience to remember from this particular call, what would it be? The one kind of thing that they now take away and they say, like, yeah, if you remember that, then I've done my job here in this particular webinar.
Right. I think one of the most important things that we could ever do is look after the people, look after our people. So if you're going to take a huge piece of work and you want to break it down, you want to descale it, you want to make it easy for your people, do so in a way that makes it easy for your people and your teams to work on. I'm thinking back in team topologies again. When we're fracturing work, we look at flow. We want to maximize flow, but we also want to reduce cognitive load. So look for ways to break things down to reduce cognitive load. It makes it easier for your people to work on.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you the same question, Tasha, but let's first see how we can answer this questions from Sarumati. And I hope that I pronounce your name correctly. What are your experiences measuring work breakdown structures, and what would be ideal cadence of these measures? I'm not quite sure if I understand what you mean by measuring work breakdown structures, or would it be really measuring the progress of the work that is broken down? If that is what you're referring to, let's interpret it that way. And if you can clarify in the chat in the meantime, that would be handy as well. So Tasha, how would you measure? Let's say that we have a work breakdown. We have this project or this initiative that we want to embark on, and we have broken down the work into smaller pieces. How would you measure progress through that? I can see some challenges with this as well.
I typically if we've broken it down to smaller tasks, if I'm taking it down to the task level, I would do it in like Scrum periods. So if you're working on like 2-week sprints, sorry, not 2-week scrums, 2-week sprints, after 2 weeks, just see where are we at, what were we able to accomplish, what ended up happening here, and it has to be it as a collective group, because I've seen in the past, you have groups 8 to 10, and then it's only like 2 or 3 individuals pushing through so much of the work, and the rest are not. And I think sometimes people also focus on just the ticket. It's not just about closing the number of tickets, and you can't really look at that. You have to look at the value of the work that was actually delivered itself. But that's what I used to do. Just 2 weeks, we'd all measure it together as a group. How did we do? Did somebody have personal stuff that was going on they weren't able to fill? Who stepped in? Because it really is about motivating the team to making sure that we're making progress. And then it's taking that step back, like, hey guys, what's going on here? And just asking those types of questions, like, how can we do better? How do we make up for some of this lost time, if we have lost time? Or, hey, we ended up, measuring against and we finished it. We were able to deliver all of our pieces. So how do we, are we in a position to take on more work for the next 2-week sprint?
Yeah, one of the things that you mentioned, Tasha, and I'll come back to you for a second to see if you can address, if you have ways to address that, is the fact making sure that it's not just about following up on a ticket, right? Making sure that it's not
Yes.
just doing the work that is associated in a ticket. So this is where I see one of the challenges coming in actually, and that is, well, hang on, if your work breakdown structure is not allowing you to get any progress, well, it's not going to be easy to show any progress at all, right? So if you're going deeper into the guts of a delivery team, and starting to think about, well, hang on, we have this particular capability that we want to build, and those initial, those small steps that we call stories, if they are not really stories, but they are tasks, and all of them need to be done for that capability to be feasible or to be valuable in at all, there's not going to be an awful lot of progress that you can see. The only progress that you can see is, we thought there were 100 tasks that we needed to do. We've done 60 of them. But we don't know if doing the additional 40 will indeed give us the value that we need. Do we have progress? Sure we do. I mean, we've done 60 tasks, but I mean, that doesn't really mean a tremendous amount. So do you have any recommendations on how to assess whether or not their work breakdown structure makes sense?
Whether it makes sense. So I think it's about asking the right questions, things such as like, what is the purpose of me completing this work? Is this related to something else larger? What if I don't do this work? What would get impacted if I delayed this a little bit longer? So I think it's really taking on more of like a thought leader. You can't think of it just as you taking as an order taker. Okay, great. Like you're asking me to do this, but actually I know that 2 weeks, or I know that this is going to expire at this point, or this hardware is going to be taken out of the system. Like, why am I going to spend all this time? So I think you have to take a step back when you look at the work, and have the ability to just ask the right questions. Is this the most important task at hand right now? What happens if I don't do it? What's the larger goal that needs to be accomplished here?
Okay, that's definitely great advice. So having a list of questions to ask for each and every one of those broken down pieces of work, that might be a very valuable way to address things. Do you have any other suggestions, Wayne?
Well, I was
jump
just
in there.
Yeah, no, I'm anxious to, yeah. So what I was thinking as you're talking about this too, I know in the Agile world, there's a similar concept for breaking down work, not necessarily a work breakdown structure, but we use story mapping.
Yeah.
So we describe our product in a map, and I've often seen people start to attach value to pieces of the map. So this particular piece that we're building out now has this amount of value, and that can even translate down into your stories if you want to add a value component to your stories, and then you can start to do a effort versus value calculation, which is basically a return on investment, and you're trying to identify the high value, low effort pieces. A story map is beautiful for that. And then if you can build and deliver a piece of your product that is of high value, you can actually measure that. And you can measure the value delivered. And the value delivered in an Agile project is supposed to give you high value early in the project. And then your value drops off because you're building lower value pieces later. And eventually you'll hit the point of diminishing returns. You can actually cut your project, maybe save some money and some time by not even bothering with the low value pieces.
Yeah, because the investment is higher than the actual value that you're getting from it. And it sounds like you just answered Morales' question as well, related to your perspective on using user story maps, user journey maps, and story mapping techniques. And Morales, my perspective there is any technique that helps you break work down into ways that allow you to get fast feedback and meaningful feedback about your progress and about the validity of your product are good techniques. And definitely use journey maps and story maps give you that. And on top of that, it aligns the teams as well with what is important in your product and in the work that you are trying to do. Okay, this is fantastic. So this is great. Now let me give you a little bit of information still on the books that we have, and that we wanted to show and share with you, because we believe that these books contain some valuable information for people on this webinar who want to add some more, get some more details. So measure what Measure What Matters is specifically related to OKRs, and the team topologies is specifically related to how you structure your teams and how big things get done. Is really about, well, how do you now address big things? How do you cut them down into smaller pieces? How do you make sure that you're successful and take one step at the time? And in the meantime, I see Mark joining us, or at least having a question. So let's see, and this specifically addressed to me. So you mentioned descaling the value streams and not scaling Agile itself. So how does this thinking map to the new safe-like methodologies that aim to bring agility to the enterprise? Now, Mark, I think you know me too well, and trying to get me to show the back of my tongue here for a second. Well, safe has its value, of course, in the industry, right? And there are companies who benefit from this, especially when the structure is already there and when they are in an organization that really needs that particular structure and that needs the rigidity, if you will, that something like SAFe provides. My preference is for an organization to move past SAFe and to move past the structure that is provided by this itself, and having shippable increments that are or PI planning with 40, 50 people, making sure that you are setting a product increment in stone for the next 3 months, and then trying to deliver on this. My preference is that you do something that is similar, but use it as a guide instead of now the law, and you keep the communication flowing between individual teams. My preference is indeed that those big products would be broken down into smaller value streams that individual teams can contribute to, and you find a way to align how those individual contributions make bigger capabilities possible. That's really what my perspective is on this, Mark, and I'm sure that in the very near future we can continue talking about this. So this was wonderful. I thank you so much, Wayne and Tasha, for joining me on this webinar. I hope that that our participants have also learned something related to this, and that they found it valuable too. And we, of course, would like to understand from each and every one of you if you did. So there is a feedback form that you see when you scan this QR code. For people who have already signed up, you will automatically get this in your email. We are very much interested in how this was valuable for you, if it was valuable at all. The format of this session, we want to get some feedback on that as well. Do you enjoy the back and forth conversation? Would you prefer to see some more slides? Whatever the feedback is, we are willing to consider it and to hear it, of course. We're very interested. So if at the same time you have some suggestions on webinars that you would like us to run, things that you would like to learn, do not hesitate to let us know. Now, last but not least, I want to thank you all for being here with us and giving us your attention and your feedback as well. So thank you so much, and take care, everyone.
Great. Thanks, everyone.